Okay.
So the deepest teaching of the Buddha, and when we say the deepest teaching, actually, it depends upon which way you're holding the jar.
Okay.
But deepest in the sense that it's the most technically detailed. That because we like things and we're not really smart about the way that we like things, we wind up wanting things, and from wanting it goes to grasping or clinging.
Mm-hmm.
And the clinging winds up being in four modes. There's four modes of clinging.
Okay. I don't think I know about those, or at least not put this way.
All
Okay.
right. Actually, it's profound, but it's also not a necessary teaching.
Oh, okay.
That the necessary teaching is to see dissatisfaction as dissatisfaction so that we could choose satisfaction instead. For instance, feeling like a loser is unsatisfactory, but
Mm-hmm.
feeling like a winner is satisfactory, and that can be manufactured.
Mm-hmm.
That's not dependent upon the outside world. It's depending upon what we're doing inside of our own mind of feeling like a champion because we're actually able to eliminate suffering. Or we can come out of a dissatisfactory state into a state of satisfaction. But looking at it in a little bit of detail, the reason why we choose things that wind up being unsatisfactory is because of a level of feeling. And that we're in the habit of having a limited range of feeling. And part of what we're going to do with the anapanasati is actually to expand that level of
Okay.
feeling. That we're going to expand it into areas that people are not normally familiar with. What
Okay.
is that?
So.
The feeling of being a champion, the feeling of doing something really marvelous, really wonderful, getting a big load out of what you just did, and become satisfied with the capability of doing that. And we're not talking about doing a particular thing or object, I'm talking about a feeling of empowerment. A feeling of being powerful
Okay.
as opposed to feeling weak. And that power actually comes through knowledge on various levels. But the ultimate foundation then of that power is going to be truth itself. As you begin to
Mm-hmm.
see things the way that they really are, and to begin to live our
Mm-hmm.
lives accordingly to truth, then we stop lying. We become strong. We're strong in the truth. We stop misbehaving, so we've got no reason to feel guilty. And we
Mm-hmm.
like that we're doing things well and correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we become pleased with our lifestyle and pleased with the way that we live. That being pleased with is actually the word pleasure. And that's the word in English that we use for the word
Mm-hmm.
sukha. Being pleased with the way
Mm-hmm.
things are. Was it our other choice? Being dissatisfied,
Mm-hmm.
not pleased. Okay, so this is the way that we're looking at it. We're looking at it from the
Okay.
sense that we need to develop a sense of pleasure while at the same time having a very, very close, intimate understanding of all of the other feelings that we're so good at.
Okay.
Because we're already good at these things, that means that they can be put into service. A lot of people say, oh, I want to get rid of my anxiety. Well, if you do it completely, you'll never get out of the chair you're in. You'll just sit there.
Okay.
And so we make it a friend, but we do not allow it to be the boss anymore. Most people live their whole lives driven by anxiety.
Yeah, I
And
think
so we could,
they can't
and
even
so we,
see working
and they
in any
can't,
other way without that stimuli. It's
exactly.
what drives them.
They, but people don't understand that anxiety, for as an example, is a feeling that comes out of habit. We're in the habit of feeling anxiety, and then when it comes up, let us say to at least an unconscious level or a subconscious level, then the person becomes aware of it in a kind of a way, and they feel kind of dissatisfied. And so they kind of look for some reason of why they're dissatisfied, and they'll come up with something. And I have an example out of the old days. The old man was
Okay.
laying in his old hovel, and he had anxiety. And so he says, I know what the problem is. It's the rock wall. And so he goes out into the night and he fixes his rock wall so that the sheep can't get out and the lion or the wolves can't get in. And then he goes back down into his hovel. He lays down. He's ready to go to sleep. And all of a sudden, the anxiety comes back again. All right. Which indicated that whatever the anxiety it was not something inside of him telling him, go fix that wall.
Mhm.
But it was something inside of him that was saying, you need to go do something. And if he would figure out that there's nothing really anything to
Okay.
do, he could say, okay, never mind, false alarm.
Mhm. Okay.
And if we would see that false alarm quality to things, then we can learn to get out of that. But in fact, it really is an easy way to look at it. That whole quality of dukkha and dukkha nirodha sounds so intellectually correct that you'd expect someone to actually start following that
Mhm.
immediately. All right. But wait a minute, the Christians have something similar to that. And that is, oh, you take a baptism, you take Jesus as your
Mhm.
Savior, and you'll be saved, and then go and sin no more. They do. But within a
You
week, they're
know.
back at the prison saying, wait a minute. That baptism you gave me didn't work. Nothing has changed. And so, understanding that the teaching of the Buddha is so simple is an important part. It's an important starting place to recognize, oh, this is all we have to do. And if I could remember that that's all we have to do, then that really is all we have to do. And so that's why sati becomes so important to keep remembering and remembering. And we want to train that up so that we can remember whenever we need anything. You know, the world is really full of good advice. The problem with good advice
Mhm.
is we don't take it when we need to take it. We forget that good advice just at the wrong moment. They call it Murphy's Law. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong, and darn it, it'll go wrong at the worst possible moment, which is, in fact, that time when the human being is the most forgetful. When he's the most forgetful, he'll try to take that socket and put it in this way because he thinks it that way without looking at it and say, oh, wait a minute, that don't go that way. It's this way. I've heard a fair amount of damage happens to cell phones that way with people trying to plug in the power upside down.
Oh, okay.
And that's a perfect example of it. All you'd have to do is just take a look at what you're doing and things will be fine. But we need to start doing that a lot. That's why sati becomes so important. It's the number one ingredient. But then we have several other tools to use. And one of them is to understand about the four requisites that we were talking about earlier. That if we can get our basics down to a certain level so that we're going to have great satisfaction by being able to come up with those four things up to a certain small standard, so that I have just adequate clothing, just adequate housing. In the northern climates, that may be difficult, but in the tropics, it's a lot easier. Living on a porch all the time. In fact, today is a rainy day. Maybe the wells will fill up again.
Oh, okay.
Adequate food and adequate medical attention. And along with that, the fifth one is the adequate amount of time structuring. Well, that should be the easy one to fulfill, because most of the people spend their time structuring around trying to fulfill the other four things, but they don't know when to quit. They're not wise about what is adequate. And so when we start to look in, how can I make my life just at a level of adequacy so that I can have more and more of my own time to myself and spend it the way that I want to, rather than in the service of these four needs that I have put in place. So those four requisites are actually kind of conjoined with that point about the four modes of clinging.
Okay.
There are major differences, but they are listed in four, and that's enough to scratch your head over. Wait a minute, four modes of clinging. Basically, the four modes of clinging are going to be clinging to that which is going to keep us alive. And if we recognize, we get into the clinging because of our habit patterns, that we are in the habit of feeling one way. And if we can change that so that we can have a feeling a different way of being joyful, being happy, being satisfied, that's power. To be really content with the way things are. You know, it's hard to run a scam on someone who's already satisfied.
Yeah.
It's only the one who's greedy who will fall into it. And so these feelings that we have, that are feelings of inadequacy, feelings of fear, feelings of guilt, feelings of anxiety, feelings of sadness, feelings of anger. These are normal feelings that we have throughout time, and we don't deal with them very well. Normally, when we deal with them ignorantly, that feeling, even the feeling of I like it, is going to be into I want it. But anger works in the same way. And the anger is that I don't like it, and I really want to get rid of it. So this liking part generally says I like it, I want it, therefore I'm going to try to get it. All right. This is the clinging then. Now, the thing that's really interesting is that it's this point of clinging that happens that something new begins to occur in the mind, and that is that the clinging requires a clingor. And this is the birth of selfishness, is because we cling to something. And as I was saying, there are four modes of clinging. And surprisingly enough, these four modes of clinging go back to a time when I was in school about the four basic instincts. The most deepest, prime instinctual behavior. I'll tell you all about it. The most deepest primary instinct that humans, or in fact any animal has, is the preservation instinct. They called it a self-preservation instinct, but a better way of looking at it would be calling it an organism preservation instinct,
Mm-hmm.
to keep the animal alive, to keep the human alive. And that much of the basic foundation of the brain, which is in the back part, is that which does that work of keeping the mind or keeping the human alive. It pumps the heart. It does the breathing. It knows how to regulate the breathing based upon the uh, um, possibly the amount of acids that are in the
Okay.
bloodstream.
Mm.
And so when there's a buildup of acid for one reason or another, uh, uh, like for instance, carbon dioxide in water is a carbonic acid. So that's
Mm-hmm.
enough of it right there without having to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the heart rate will increase in order to get that down, that amount of acid in the blood. However, that's not the only thing that has the ability to breathe. Unlike the heartbeat is basically based upon that same part of the brain, but the breathing can be controlled by the frontal cortex. They've seen this through
Mm-hmm.
MRIs. That when people start to breathe consciously, the frontal cortex starts to light up. And this is one of the reasons why, or let us say, this is some of the underlying um, physiological stuff
Okay.
that Buddha did not have access to, but he knew that it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Was this long breath to keep your mind somewhat focused on the breathing while you're doing things throughout the day to make sure that you're getting enough air. This is a good thing to start structuring time over, is to start monitoring and watching the breath, breathing a little
Okay.
more than you would normally. This
Mm-hmm.
is step one of Anapanasati. But we have to remember to do that. So that's why the other aspects of Anapanasati come into play. So now back to the feelings. The feelings, when they come up, like anxiety or whatever like that, if we're not paying attention to them, like we're not paying attention to the breath and we're all in la la land and we're not watching what's going on. But if we are watching the breathing, then all of the other feelings become much closer to the surface so that they're actually there to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
It's much easier to see those things, especially when you're sitting, let us call it from a perch of sukha or pleasure. Once we can get ourselves into a state of satisfaction and we're sitting there kind of watching the breath, easy going, everything is wonderful, then when any feelings come up, they can be easily seen for what they are. And I've got so many students that are saying just this very much, because a lot of people think that you have to practice meditation for years before you can get really in touch with these deep feelings. Oh no, oh no. Within a week or two, you start watching, you'll start seeing that stuff come up. But there's no reason to feel bad about it. Say, aha, I see you, just like we saw the mind wandering away.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And you'll become aware of these feelings so that they don't go into the normal course of operation. You're going to get wise to what's going on inside rather than taking an ignorant path. So the ignorant path, let's look at that a little bit more because I've given you the basics. I
Okay.
like it goes into I want it. I want it goes into I've got to have it. That's the grasping and clinging grasping a hold to and clinging on to it, as opposed to the reaching. They talk about grasping in the sense of actually the reaching or the wanting. But normally in English, when we talk about grasping, we're actually talking about we've got it. So that reaching quality is I want it. That normally is what happens to a young man when he sees a pretty girl. I like her, therefore I want her. But you don't have to. If you can catch that, you can say, wow, is she dolled up? She's up to the nines. I wonder how much that makeup cost. I wonder what she looks like under all of that paint. I wonder how many boyfriends she's trying to say no to already. And when we recognize that there's some reality there that's beyond that lust that's actually painted onto her face, then we can see, oh, wait a minute, I like it, but I don't want it. And then we can stop this thing. But if I like it goes to I want it, now we're going into dangerous territory.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to stop then.
Right, and that hard to stop quality then is when we really, really want to hold on to it, and that's the grasping or the clinging. This clinging is of four kinds, so the Buddha says. The basic one is the self-preservation instinct, which actually is a clinging to me. I want to keep myself alive, etc. So that's the basic one. And that's clinging to a personality view. That personality view then is going to be in various layers, and one of the layers is a personality doctrine, which means a doctrine is not just what one individual thinks of himself as, but it's kind of like the collective wisdom within a group. So like the Christians have a doctrine of the self that they call a soul. Hindus have a doctrine of the self. It's surprising how close they are when you really look at it. The Muslims have a doctrine of the self. Buddhists have a doctrine of the self. In fact, the Buddhist has got dozens of doctrines of self. Well, at least 3 or 4. But we have these doctrines of selves, and that the first thing that we have to begin to understand is, oh no, this self that is created at that time of clinging is the issue and the problem, not something. In other words, the instinct, the self-preservation instinct comes on the field. It comes into play. So the self-preservation instinct, when it's in operation, is very much like the self itself. But it's only an instinct. It's built into the genes as old programming. It goes not back to our time as apes and monkeys. In fact, we're still apes. And a lot of people I know monkeys. But it goes beyond that, back to the time of the mammal. But even before that, even back to the time of the reptile. Everything that we do is self-preservation. The reptiles had that and still do. Most of the things that you can do that an alligator could do or can do is controlled by the same part of your brain that is his brain. Walking and wagging our tail, wherever we don't have one, such a big one, and clawing our way to the top, eating large quantities of food, all of the kind of things. The crocodiles have eyes. We've got eyes. They have ears. We have ears. All of the things that the crocodiles had and have, we've got that in the back part of our brain. Well, what the crocodiles don't have, for instance, is language. We've got a very sophisticated language, But guess what? So do the apes, so do the monkeys, dolphins, all kinds of things have a really good language. But what the humans have is kind of a spatial representation. It gives us the capability to do mathematics. We can put things together. We can intuit. We can describe things in ways. For instance, we can see a human being that's dead and we can recognize it. Oh, poor Charlie, I loved him so much. Let's give him a decent burial. And then we can put together, even I will die.
Mm-hmm.
Dogs don't do that. They see a dead dog carcass there and they smell it. Do I want to eat this or not? And then they wander off. Because they don't have that human quality that can do that level of understanding. But that level of understanding for humans has just gone batshit crazy sometimes, trying to satisfy this self-preservation instinct in the wrong way. This basic selfishness that arises from time to time. It's not there all the time, but in doctrines of the self, it's there all the time. In fact, in some doctrines of the self, is permanent, everlasting. They call it an everlasting soul. Others are more semi-eternal. Others are, it's going to be there until you die. But the reality of the situation about the self-preservation instinct and the way the Buddha describes it is, you don't know, it only comes up sometimes, and then it goes away. And then it comes up sometimes again. And when it comes up again, the reason it is because this is a really dangerous moment. Things have already gotten too bad. This is a screw-up point. It's like danger, 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 danger is what's going on because the suffering is. But that means then that the self-preservation instinct and these instinctual behaviors actually are then the seed of suffering. As long as we can stay out of instinctual behavior and stay in the frontal cortex and stay human, we've got it made. We feel the way we want to feel. We are not prisoners of these old feelings that are all associated with us staying alive. Because we've already, with our wisdom, been able to manage a very excellent staying alive situation, which we call these 4 primary requisites. We get these things down, we're good to go. And then there's no reason, no room for anger, no room for sadness, dejection of heart, unhappiness, dissatisfaction. Because we've got the very basics that we need. Knowing that if I go below that, for instance, if I get so sick that I wind up in the hospital, I may give myself at least a few minutes of bad feeling before I say, oh, that's not enough. You can't feel bad yet. You got to wait until you die. And you say, wait a minute, that's not a good time to feel bad either. That's a good time to say goodbye for a while. See you, or maybe not. Out of here. So there's no real reason for us to go into these bad feelings. But we do have these 4 primary requisites set up so that we can guarantee ourselves a floor for living. Now, many of us will test that. How low can we go and still stay happy? Can I walk, for instance, can I walk around Hyderabad in southern India barefoot with no clothes on, eating stuff only off of the ground? Because there's guys who do that. They're called dog duty aesthetics. They don't eat off a plate. They only eat off the ground. Spit out the sand. How low can you go? The answer is not that low. Not today. I've been there, done that. So this is the way that we look at it. Knowing that we've got a floor, then that means that if we're mindful of the breathing and mindful of the moment, then whenever any of these old feelings come up, we can manage them wisely. We can say, oh, there really is no reason to get angry. There is no real reason to be greedy.
Mm-hmm.
But if it does come, then it will come up into these four modes of clinging. And we've already started to talk about one at the basic instinctual level. This self is there. But
Mm-hmm.
there are more modes that you can see that's actually quite understandable for us. The second mode of clinging is what is referred to as proprioception, which has to do with sensuality, sexuality, making
Mm-hmm.
babies, not making babies, having a good time, being a failure at it, and all of the associated lifestyle that we have with that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. In other words, a lot of guys will buy a particular car thinking that it's going to be a chick magnet. If I
Yeah.
get a car, I can get a girl. You wouldn't believe how strong that motivation is in the United States because it's being sold that way on television. So that materialism is there. And we wind up being a very materialistic society, and our materialism is actually destroying the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's wanting more and more and
Mm-hmm.
more. And quite often that more and more is only represented as numbers on paper.
Exactly. Okay. Hmm.
And when I see that number on paper, I feel this way. And then when I put it down, I say, wait a minute, I don't feel good enough yet. I got to have a bigger number on paper.
I was listening to a talk. It was mindfulness on money, and the first thing that the instructor said that he worked with a lot of people from rich to poor, and he asked them, "Okay, what's your financial goal?" And everybody said 50% more than they had. So it was a general rule, no matter what income they had. So
Yes. And so when Mr. A gets his 150%, guess where his goal is now?
yeah,
At
150%.
150% of where it was right now,
Yeah.
wherever it is now, the goal is okay, so that's the greed. But the wisdom says you got to find that floor. And when
Mhm.
you've got that floor mat, there's nothing more to be done.
Mhm.
That's all you will need. Except now we can deal with the feelings directly as they come up. And so this again is that materialism. This is why Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about that procreation instinct is much more materialism, is our ownership of property that is associated with our safety and security. And in fact, that's one of the sexual attractions. We are attracted to each other as sexual mates because we see great security in that.
Mhm. Okay. Mhm.
That it completes my life somehow, that I'm missing a second half or whatever. And when I get that girl, then I'll feel secure, whole, complete. And that's a delusion because a girl does not make you complete. She's going to spend a whole lot of time pointing out what you need next. But it goes in both directions, you know.
Mhm.
So the point then is that there is this thing that has to do with a human's materialistic um, relationship with his environment. And that has to do then with the society. And it's a deep relationship. And so as we begin to break that relationship with society, we begin to break it in this sense that I don't need all of those physical possessions, that I can live with less and less. Now, if young people can learn that early, then they won't be in debt. People go in debt thinking that, oh, I need this now to live now, though, even though I don't have the resources for it. And so they wind up going in debt rather than thinking over, would I be better off not having that, whatever it is. So go to the next one. The third one is what we call, in the scientific world, we would call it the nesting instinct.
Okay.
And that what we're talking about here is another level of safety. The human being's nest now is the entire planet Earth. And one of the most important qualities with a particular small nest is that you got to get along to stay in the nest. That it becomes a survival issue. And so what happens is at a very deep instinctual level, humans get attached to doing things in a certain way because it fits in. You could call this now the society itself. And that the Buddha talks about it in the sense of Sila Bhatta Paramasa. Sila Bhatta Paramasa is not only now this third form of clinging, but is also the name of the second fetter that one has to get rid of. The first one being the self, and then the second one is our relationship to the way things are done. And so you can see how this materialism works directly with that. As we withdraw from the material world, we also withdraw from its social conventions. That we no longer have to do things the way that society expects us. That we have, in fact, a new higher law to fulfill. And that newer higher law to fulfill is dukkha, dukkha nirodha. In other words, I'm going to come out of the dissatisfaction that following these rules create, though they've made me safe somehow, and I'm going to start figuring out what's the right way to do things.
Okay.
That we no longer blindly follow the rules. Now we follow the rules with great wisdom. But our rule systems are changed so that we got a different set of rules that we go by. Oftentimes they mesh completely, but quite often they don't. An example of that would be you get stopped by a policeman. Dukkha nirodha laws are going to tell you how you're going to behave about this time. You're going to cooperate. You're going to be friendly with him. Exactly. So in that way, the laws work together. But in this way, you can see how they don't, because if you're following the law of dukkha nirodha and that clock stops you, there's no reason for you to feel anxious, uptight, afraid of the cop. Because if you do act anxious, uptight, and afraid of the cop, he's trained to pick that stuff up. In other words, he can see if you're feeling guilty. But if you're not feeling guilty because you're friendly, then it works. So this is a way that you can begin to see how that a new set of rules, dukkha nirodha, will in fact replace all of the old rule systems that used to seem so very complicated. And now things become very easy. And this also is one of the main modes of clinging, that we're not clinging down to any more shoulds or oughtas. It ought to be this way. That we can accept the way things are, rather than making our own rules about it and say, okay, this is my rule, you follow my rules. That we can dispense with the rules. So now let's look at the fourth mode of clinging.
Okay.
The fourth mode of clinging is normally in the instinctual world known as the territorial instinct.
Oh, okay.
This territorial instinct is the territory within which I live, my boundaries, and I feel safe within that territorial boundary, but things that are outside of my territory may be dangerous. How this winds up within the human mind is not so much actual territory, but you can see that the way that the maps are drawn. But we also do it in the sense of racism. We do it in the form of other people. That's them. This is our religion. This is the way we dress. That's their religion. That's the way they dress. And we're better than they are. And so it's easy with this territorial instinct in operation to not see what's underlying that's real and similar, but we're only looking at the surface level from the particular point of danger. They're not like us, therefore they're dangerous. And in the United States, you'll see that very strongly, that the whites see the blacks as dangerous, and the blacks see the whites as dangerous. Where in fact the biggest danger is that they hold for themselves. In other words, if I'm afraid of him and there's no reason to be afraid of him, then I'm behaving badly. And I'm suffering. I'm sitting here in a state of fear when there is nothing to be afraid of if I would just look. But these fears come from these old primitive instincts that basically go back to the self-preservation instinct. In other words, the fear. So you can see how this operates in tribalism, even to the point that a guy wanders into the wrong bar where the people in that bar have a particular sports team that they love. And he doesn't love that sports team. Okay? You can see how things are going to get real dangerous. And so this is how it operates. Whatever we cling to is going to cause suffering because of our identity. In other words, if we identify with a religion, then when things go up or things go down with that religion, then I go up too and I go down too. In other words, now I'm attaching myself to something that I have no control over, the highs and lows. I'm going to have to suffer simply because I consider myself a Christian. If I consider myself a Republican, then I'm going to have highs and lows depending upon the Republicans. So this is then the way that we loosen ourselves from the territorial instinct is by not having any territory, to start identifying where we cling to things and stop clinging to them. Stop clinging to political parties, stop clinging to religions, stop clinging to the way things that ought to be done. For instance, global warming. A lot of good Buddhists are just marching up and down about global warming, but they're just making themselves hot. I mean, they're creating global warming. Why don't they chill out? Yes, there is an issue of global warming. We understand that. The question is, can you enjoy yourself in hot weather? Because your footprint has already been made small because of your lifestyle change, that you're not out traveling so much, no place to go, because we're satisfied with the way things are. And if everyone would live that kind of lifestyle, then there wouldn't be a problem with global warming. We wouldn't want anything from Exxon.
Okay.
Or we wouldn't want anything that the Saudis made. They don't make anything. They just dig it out of the ground and put it on the tanker. So this is the way that we look at old big problems, our only old big problems, because we've been trained to think of them like that. That in fact, just because humanity has a problem doesn't mean that it's my problem. It only does when I identify with humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a big issue about this identification. Be careful about what you identify with, because whatever you identify with is going to cause you suffering.
Mm-hmm. And probably for others as well.
And so we have to be both ready for that suffering and wise enough to know how to avoid it or minimize it,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can maintain our state of sukha, our state of pleasure. And this is the teaching of the Buddha. And in fact, this is the teaching that everybody would love to have. And if people could lead and live this lifestyle, the planet Earth would be much better off.
Mm-hmm.
There may be a bit of government only because a bit of planning is needed, but that would only in the sense of being able to have people manage their lives easily. But it wouldn't be with a gross national product. In fact, I like the Bhutan. In Bhutan, they have a gross national happiness. That's what they shoot for. And it's a Buddhist country. Yeah, let's have our governments try to increase the level of well-being and happiness for the individual people in that nation, rather than trying to get as much money as they can. But they would have to take a lot of the tribalism and a lot of the rule systems that they have and make some changes there. But these changes would be based upon wisdom rather than greed.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't expect that from the big world unless you expect that from your own self. So you almost now have a duty to humanity by being able to clean up your own act, be able to clean out your own mind, so that you're no longer suffering under the feelings that used to control you.
Mm-hmm.
That you're going to be the master and friend of those feelings rather than their lackey. And when you have that, then you have something worthwhile. This is the real teaching of the Buddha. To work with these four modes of clinging. Eventually, we'll get down to the point of working with deeper issues such as conceit and deep restlessness. But in the surface, we have to recognize that the self is temporary. Everything about who you are is temporary. It arises, and when it does arise, look out, danger. Things have already gotten to disastrous point, otherwise the self wouldn't come up. Live a life free and satisfied. But you also have to know where your boundaries are. What are the limits? What is your foundation? What are the things that you need to have in order to survive? Just enough housing, just enough clothing, just enough food, just enough shelter, just enough medicine. And once we have that, then you don't need anything else. You got all you need. Everything after that is just, hey, that's what do you call it? Palace merchandise that just happened to landed on the port. And this all has to do then with a change of attitude. That attitude change of from going from unsatisfactory and willing to put up with unsatisfactoriness in order to get a future reward into, oh no, I'm not going to play that game anymore. I'm going to look for my satisfaction right now. and maintain it right now. Take a nice deep breath and enjoy the moment right now. This is all we've got. So in this regard, the entire teaching of the Buddha is very simple, very small, not big at all. But he taught for 45 years, so what do you expect? So do you have any questions about what we've talked about today?
Okay. No, I was thinking about, let's say, having these deeper impulses come up and having mindfulness when they come up as with distractions. I think I find it a bit harder when I have like feelings, especially what you said, this is the way things should be done. And I tend to cling on to that a bit more. I recognize that. So I don't know any off cushion practices or ways to recenter with these. I don't know, something along
All
those
right,
lines.
let's say this. The Buddha said in the ones in the Anguttara Nikaya about, he was doing analogies, and he says, monks, the mind is fast. The mind is so fast, I don't have any analogies for how fast the mind is. Now, this is important because basically what we've actually been doing in this conversation alone is we've actually been dividing into very, very, very short time intervals. This feeling going to liking, going to wanting, going to grasping and clinging, going into one of the four modes of clinging, and then the self that goes along with that happens in far less than a second. However, now that you know that all of that is happening very quickly, you can start watching for it. As soon as you say, oh, this is hard, basically what you're saying is, oh, I missed that one.
Yes. That's
but
essentially
then
it.
the, oh, this is hard comes from the old crap because, in fact, you did let one by and now you've let a second one by.
Okay.
It's not hard. It's just watch what's going on.
Okay.
You're going to miss a few from time to time. But your whole life is going to change, even if you do miss a few of them, because you used to miss a lot of them, and life was tough.
I didn't even know I missed them, so.
And you didn't even know you missed them. Now you're beginning to see, oh, I missed that one, but don't let me have to chase after it. Because while I'm chasing it, I'll go into a deeper problem. Like calling it hard work. When it's not hard, this is joyful. I see you.
All right.
But remember, the mind is very fast.
Okay.
So fast, it does not have an analogy. It's that fast.
Okay, I'll catch it after the fact a lot of times, and I'll catch it even earlier, so it's fine. It just comes back to the attitude change, as you said. So.
Exactly. Change that attitude as soon as you have a chance to do it. As soon as you recognize it. That's when to change it. Not pine for, oh, I should have seen that one sooner, because that's not changing the attitude yet.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, so if you don't have any more questions, then we'll finish this conversation.
No, I'm fine.
You're great. Excellent. All right, well, you go keep practicing as you go. You get into that state of satisfaction. That's the important thing.
Okay.
Get into that, and then you can begin to see how this other stuff works.
Alrighty then. Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.